Computer. So I'll share my screen. Today is the Sage Build a Guild, and we are 55 days away from the launch of Sage, the permaculture garden app. And today we're going to talk about why a permaculture gardening app is important, and what does that have to do? How does permaculture design? How is that different than normal organic gardening design? And one of the things that makes it different in the approach of permaculture, and I'm not going to go into what is permaculture, it's a design system that it really integrates everything holistically. But one way that it does that is it looks especially at perennials in a different way, and it looks at them through the lens of different things, function, and that's what Sage is going to walk us through. And here are, let me see, function, your climate, your space and time, and also ecosystem diversity. So I guess I'll just go and give a little brief intro to Sage. Oh, there's Andrea, and she's from Texas. I'll just go and give a brief intro to Sage, but if you are interested, the workbook that accompanies this workshop is on this link, and I'll pop that in the chat for you all. Hello, Andrea, welcome. It's so good to see you here. How's the weather like in Texas? When you can, let us know via chat. And that workbook will help walk you through it if you don't have the app. Rainy, yes, it's kind of rainy here too, but snowy. It didn't snow. Did it snow where you are this year? Because yeah, last year you guys all had a very, very cold winter. But yeah, so today we are going to walk through this in an analog way, and then walk through it in a Sage way. But yes, so this part was the hello meet and greet. I was gonna stop sharing and see if anybody wanted to share some more. Andrea, did you want to say anything about what your plans are for the garden this year? Well, when you get on, we'll get back to you. So here's our agenda. We'll do a little bit of an intro to Guild, and then, oh, there you are. Hey, Andrea, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah.
So you grew a lot this past year, but what's your goal for this coming 2024?
To plant more.
Yes, to keep on growing and to plant more. I wonder what that'll look like.
I bought some Eureka cucumber seeds.
Oh, those are the
and
ones for you.
yeah. And right now all our plants are covered. We had like 19 degrees. And I think all my tomatoes froze, even though they were covered. But lettuces and all that are still okay.
But the fact that you got tomatoes up to January,
Yeah.
that's amazing. She just covered it and created her own microclimate um, in her backyard. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty impressed by that, Andrea. Let's see what were you thinking of any perennials this year?
I have not planned yet. So, yeah, I would like to have persimmon.
Oh, yes. The Asian ones are really good. Yeah, that would be amazing. And I think that might work in your climate. Would that sage be able to tell us that? Do you know, Andrea? Does it work in your climate?
I know persimmons grew in um, North in Dallas area, but I don't know about here. Probably.
In Houston, it's a little bit hotter sometimes. Is that
Mhm.
yeah,
Well, we're just different.
Yeah.
We're
Ah, well, Dave, would sage be able, if you put, we lose a lot of sunlight in the winter, Jeremy says, due to the mountain that he's in. Yeah, that's one thing. We do lose sunlight everywhere, really. And then the sun doesn't go as high up. And that's one of the things that you notice when you design too, your property is when do you notice the sun this coming year? When will you notice the sun hitting a certain part of your garden again? What date? So take note of those dates. And I think what is missing when I've given these sage build-a-guilds in the past, and I often focus on the space, the time, and what it is that we're putting in a guild. But then I don't go in as in depth into the actual climate. And so I wanted to do that now by talking a little bit about the climate first before we go into the space, the niches in space and the niches in time. And why are we doing this? We're doing this because we're trying to collect a group of beneficial plantings around a perennial or group of perennials. And we'll give you a few examples of that, of what that looks like in different parts of the world, even. And and then they're all supposed to work together in symbiosis, helping one another and growing more and more abundant every year. That's and letting us do less and less work. So I want to hold that thought of a persimmon tree. And Jeremy, if you have a perennial that you're interested in too, like an apple tree or a pear tree this year, type it in the chat and we'll see what we can go build this at the end of this hour.
If you give me, yeah, your star player, then I'll try to get it in the database while Nikki's talking. If it's not already there.
Okay, thank you.
So here I've lifted this from a great resource that I also mentioned in the community. The community, people who are in the GIY community or the GIY program, they can find all the resources attached to the different workshops we have on the comments portion here. And so this particular website is called the Polyculture Project, and it's in Bulgaria. And I've had the permission to use some of these things and to promote them as well to you all. So Paul, who heads this project, he will start when he starts designing a guild. He will start with the climate and what the Köppen climate classification is, the USDA hardiness zone, up to what that gives you a little bit of a parameter of how frozen your things can get. The latitude and the elevation tell you whether you have, well, the mountain will tell you whether you'll have wind issues or microclimate issues. And the elevation will tell you, like, if you're closer to the sea, then you can get cooler temperatures than farther away from the sea. So this gives you like a broader context of the picture. So think of that when you design, when you choose your plants as well. That's why the persimmon, I'm more familiar with the persimmon here in our climate than I am with Andrea's climate, but thinking about that and seeing where do I see it around here. And you notice that's in the Dallas area, but let's see, with the temperatures, whether we can grow that in Houston or not. So we start with a climate survey that helps us define the boundaries of our options, and the kind of information we're looking for is as follows. So what's the mean temperature or the average amount of rain that it receives? And then you'll match that up later with the information about your plant, especially your perennial plant, and especially if you're not familiar with that plant, like it's a new plant that you want to purchase. And so that's my summary of it. And then we sing this 10 crucial steps most organic gardeners forget about song, which if you're in the GIY program, and that's first thing is to observe, to think holistically. 3, note your zones of use. Again, zones of use. Where are you going to put this guild? Are they going to be far away from your property or just, a walk away? Especially if they're perennial trees, you probably don't often have them super close to your house. Unlike annual vegetables or herbs. And that's what zones of use means. It's how the proximity to your area. And when you design, you would be able to place that into the context of your whole property and not just into one and look at that guild in isolation, which is what we might fall into the trap that we might fall into while designing a guild in isolation of our house. So 4, know your local climate. 5, find your microclimate. 6, note topography. How much water runs across your roof? Where do people go? Investigate the weeds if you don't know. So these things are really those steps if you can sing them. And if you get the recording, you can sing them as you walk around your property before you even choose the crops that you're going to grow. And then you think about the space and you look at the different layers that your crops will occupy. The tree, what would be under the tree, the bushes that would be a possibility that could live under the tree. We have an herbaceous layer, or the smaller herbs and things that would grow under the tree. Sometimes we only think of the tree in isolation and think, I'm going to grow an apple tree and another apple tree here, but it needs helpers, and we forget that it will grow better with helper friends that occupy, yes, different spaces in a guild, but also different functions. And that is where the workbook, that is where Sage, what Sage will walk you through. Here is how you would go about doing this on your own, even without Sage. You think of a star player, and then you think about the functions that its friends or its companions would need to provide for that star player to thrive. For an apple tree, for instance, you need something to fix nitrogen. You need something to repel the weeds or repel the apple borer. You need something to accumulate mulch. That's usually an herbaceous layer. You need something to suppress weeds and to keep the soil in the ground, cover the ground, and to attract pollinators. So these are one of the major functions, some of the major functions in the workbook and in Sage that we kind of prompt you to think about before you even just plop that tree in there without thinking of all the other things.
And this isn't comprehensive. There's also things like windbreak or wildlife habitat. What you're trying to figure out is what useful functions that plant provides aside from being edible in your garden.
Yes. And then Jeremy, you said you wanted peaches and apples and to replace some of the new trees as they're aging, but it would be a free stone fruit. Okay, great. Yeah, it's great that you already chose your star player. So we'll go with that. And here, so the next step is, so choose your star player. And I will give you, actually, we will walk through it in Sage, but I'm going to, instead of walking you through it in the workbook, I'm going to go ahead and jump to guild examples just to give you an idea of what this looks like in real life. So for instance, an apple tree, that the apple is your star player, and around it, you can plant comfrey, which is an herbaceous layer or a shrub kind of plant that acts as a mulch and a dynamic accumulator. That means it accumulates minerals from underneath the soil, brings them up to the ground and into the leaves, and remineralizes the surface that might have been run off or washed off. Garlic chives is a weed suppressor and also a bug deterrent because of the smell. Daffodils are pretty, so they have several functions. In permaculture, we think of one element, multiple functions. At least 3 functions is what Bill Mollison, the founder of the word permaculture, would say per element. So nothing is wasted. You're stacking functions. Those kinds of words are permaculture sayings. We say them around the house, even for things that when we go out to make ourselves more efficient, when we go and plan our day, we stack functions. Bee balm is an attractor, and you can replace this with whatever other pollinator you'd like. This is not just for an apple, but these have been found to grow well with apples. And so you could use this as a template, a jumping point, and then swap out the things that work, that don't work, for your climate or your situation, with other alternatives that fulfill similar functions. And you can also see, what else do you notice about the functions here? You're thinking comfrey. We also have chickens. Yes, it can be used as feed. If the chickens will, not our chickens will probably snub their nose at it. But I hope that your chickens don't, because they're really healthy. They're like herbs. But what other things do you notice about the functions? Anyone?
I'm not sure.
That's okay. So we have redundancies in the functions, and that's okay to have. You can have two things do the same thing. The more diverse your community of plants, the better. But if you do have two things that do similar things, suppress weeds, and they look differently, you will harvest a flower from here, and you'll harvest garlic chives from here. But they have that same function. That's great to build redundancies into your system so it's more stable. So that's an apple guild example. And here's a raised bed guild. This is just an example of an annual. So annuals can also be guilds. Sometimes we just think of them as perennials, perennial guilds. In general, when we build guilds, it's mostly perennials, but annuals can also be arranged in such a way that they are beneficial groupings. Sometimes we call these companion planting. But thinking of those functions and thinking of the space that they occupy in 3D is also good. Like you have a tomato growing up a trellis, a pole bean growing up a trellis, and then you have all that space underneath. You need to have a ground cover to cover the soil, and you have a lot of underground growing space for the carrots, and that doesn't interfere with growing tulsi, which is a medicinal herb. So, and once again, this is just a starting point, just the template. And you guys, and I'm sure, Andrea, you probably have some good companion plants. Not necessarily like duo companion plants, but like formulas for how your tomatoes went bonkers, in the summer, that you have to offer up, right? That what grew well together with your tomatoes. Do you have any suggestions?
I wish I did. I think I had Burpee Hybrid 2
Uh-huh.
gave tomatoes in the heat and the cooler weather.
Oh.
But I couldn't, I bought a plant and I haven't been able to find the seeds for that. So, and plants aren't out yet, but the Eureka cucumbers, I had some green beans planted close to them. The beans didn't do very well, but they might have gotten too much shade. I don't know.
That's true. Did you have them planted in the same place that you had the cow peas? What was it? Cow peas or
Black eyed peas, no.
here? No, that's a different place. Okay. Yeah, that's funny. Maybe they did get too much shade. So things like these, where we're making these observations and then we're gonna have to try again next year. This is what we're hoping Sage will capture for us so that we don't make the same mistake again. But thanks. I know you had marigolds in there with your tomato.
My marigolds looked so good right before the freeze, and then I didn't cover them, and they're just dead.
That's okay. Some of their seeds will come back. We'll make them come back, I'm sure. If not, it's easy to plant them again. Yeah. Thanks, Andrea. How about you, Jeremy? Did you have any from your did you notice anything? You had a good crop of beets and you had a good crop of no beets, but not what did you say the other thing was?
Radish.
Radish.
But they were good actually. They grew real well.
Were they growing alone?
Yeah, they were this time. Yeah, because I planted them late. So it was kind of like just to try it out to see how they would do.
And I'm
They
glad,
did well.
yeah, and I'm glad they did well for you.
Certain things, like you said, grow better some year. We find some years some things grow better and other years they don't. Um, Kind of a climate thing, I think. To,
Yeah, it could be a climate thing, it could be a soil thing. And
yeah.
that part, like that part, you always have to be. That's why we put a bean or a
Mhm.
legume in a plot of annuals or even a perennial because we're always looking for that nitrogen fixer
Mhm.
to keep on fertilizing the soil for us because that just gets the nutrients keep on getting used up and you want to make sure that they're still coming back to the soil somehow through your mulching, through the plants, through
Mhm.
so
We
this
have issues with tomatoes typically. Sometimes they're really good, other times they're terrible. And then we have issues more with tomatoes and there was one other thing I was thinking of. Cucumbers are kind of touchy. Certain plants though are very consistent, but others, we have a lot of trouble with them.
yeah, and that's where the variety matters. So see if Andrea's Eureka cucumbers might be helpful for you. You guys are totally different climates, but if you can prove that Eureka can grow well in your climate, then that gives a lot of people a better choice in the States, that of a reliable one. Because the variety does make a difference. It likes different climates sometimes or different soil.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll go into polycultures. Now, this is something I haven't talked about before, but polycultures are the same thing as permaculture guilds. It is just present this, present, oh, this part here. So this one is called a polyculture belt or a guild belt. A belt is basically a layout that includes a variety of species planted in multiple strips across an area as shown in the below example. So in this case, they have a lot of space and we may not all have a lot of space, but if you wanted to, I think this is a car, right? If you wanted to and you had a driveway and you wanted to line that driveway, you could create a guild that's in a belt or a polyculture belt. And even within that belt, um, this person has themes for each of the belts. Paul has themes for each of the belts. He has a soft fruit lane, inter alley. That's just an alley, and then a fruit tree lane, and then he has an alley, and then he has a nitrogen fixing lane. So it's giving off uh nutrition in this particular belt. And maybe next year he will add the nitrogen fixers here, or maybe these are nitrogen fixing shrubs, I'm not sure. And then he has a wildflower strip. So this makes sense for sure because whatever pollinators he attracts anywhere near here will fly over there as well and pollinate his fruit trees. This is a little zoom in of what that a belt might look at like if it's a fruit tree lane, for instance. I'm looking at the fruit tree lane, and so he has here hazel trees, apricot, prunes. And what do you notice about how he's laid it out?
They're, they're all mixed up, aren't they?
Yeah, they're all mixed up, or they're alternating patterns, right? uh
The
see
idea is to kind of confuse the pests so they don't just settle in one area.
Mm-hmm.
They can't just go to the neighboring tree. They'd have to go around the neighboring trees to get to another tree of the same species.
So if it's a bee that prefers fruit, like a peach versus an apple or something like that, right?
yeah
Yeah, so um a lot like bees range quite a big range, but most pests, insects tend to, they don't
Mm.
range as much. Once they find what they're looking for, they go and kind of like uh decide to kind of isolate it and attack that thing.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's an example of a guild. And here's another one that he shared. This is just three things in a guild. And this is a market garden, and it's wild strawberry, which is a perennial, garlic chives, which are kind of biennial, and asparagus. Actually, all of these are non-annuals. So that's pretty cool. And they're all market garden things. So he knows it'll stay here for a while. He won't be pulling them up after a season. And what do you know? And the same thing, right? You notice that same, they're all mixed up, but it's like organized pattern, but it's all mixed up. It's not one whole row of one thing. It's interplanted. So think about that when you do your own guilds. And now I'll have you share, Davy.
Okay, so I'm walking through how Sage executes a guild.
Maybe grab somebody's tree perennial as a star player and see.
Okay, so you should have access to Sage. The website again is, a log out here, sage.growmyownfood.com. Let me know if you can't log in, but what I'll do,
Drop it, the link in the chat.
oh, sure. Could you do that, please?
I'll do that. Thank you.
So we have a lot of pieces, and I have an administrator view, so it's a little more cluttered. And we're kind of working on our workflows now. We have a lot of the pieces to support planning out your garden, but we're trying to think more like, okay, in a practical sense, when we're kind of thinking about what we want to grow, how do we do that? So one of the things that I've kind of initially come up with is, when you're thinking about your property, you tend to break up your property into different areas. So we're going to have both a logical view of that and a kind of a map overhead view of that. So the overhead map view of that is going to be in something we call the designer, and you'll be able to draw your house and all the kind of like an overhead 2D view, all the different garden areas. And then you'll be able to see that same information in a logical format in this plants area. But what we thought of is, when you're first thinking about an area, and you're trying to figure out what you want to plant in that area, you tend to we were kind of like thinking of what's the decision tree, so it's not so overwhelming. You can think of your garden areas more thematically. So we thought like the first step when you're thinking thematically about your garden areas is this going to be a predominantly an annual garden bed or a perennial garden bed? So the difference is, in an annual garden area, you're mostly growing things that you're going to have to start from seed. You're going to have to manage when you transplant those things, and you're going to have to manage, when you harvest them. So there's a lot of thinking about calendars and rotations and things that are heavy feeders and things like that. But when you're thinking about a perennial, we've been talking more about a guild, which quite often is consists of more perennials. So it's a little harder to get established initially, but the kind of questions that you're asking about the area are quite different. You're thinking about when the flowering, a lot of these things in permaculture guild, since they're perennials, they're going to come back year after year. So you're kind of thinking about how they look, how big they are, when they tend to flower, when they tend to produce edible fruits or nuts or berries or what have you. So the questions that you're asking are quite different than the questions you're asking in an annuals bed. So we wanted to initially we had this wizard for annuals called Crop Planner, but it doesn't really work for when you're planning out perennials. And this isn't to say that like you can't have any annuals in your perennials bed or vice versa, but predominantly in these areas, you're going to be thinking about that area. It's going to mostly either have perennials or it's mostly going to have annuals. So what Nikki's been talking about up to now is the stages of kind of planning out that perennial area, the plants that you would add in that perennial area, using kind of permaculture principles. So she's explained that in how you do that on paper. So what we've noticed when we've tried to do guild design before is that there are probably like two major roadblocks in really doing that effectively. So the first problem is, when you're looking at the function that you want to fulfill in your guild, like you want a pollinator, then it's quite difficult to figure out like what are the possibilities. There might be dozens of possibilities for a specific function, and unless you're a very experienced permaculture gardener and you've grown all these perennials before, it's kind of difficult to kind of like say, oh, I know, it could be any of these 5 things in my climate. So just having a knowledge base, a database that's storing all that information was one of the major things that we wanted to include. And then the other thing is when you start thinking about seasons and layout, it's a little difficult to manage that information on a piece of paper. You can kind of get that initial information, but over time you'll tend to lose that piece of paper, or it can be hard if you want to make changes to it, and keep and record observations. So we wanted to make this Sage holistic in the way that it would capture not just the design part of it, but when you start recording harvests and taking observations into how things are going, you'll be able to go back and reference that same information that you used to design the guild. So I don't know if you want, Nikki, did you want to actually step through the tool? Might be a little better.
Yeah, go ahead and walk us through.
Okay, so the first step that Nikki mentioned before is when you're thinking about a permaculture guild, you kind of have a star player. This tends to be usually a fruit tree or a nut tree of some kind. When we say star player, it doesn't mean that you can only have one of these, or you can't have multiple star players. But it kind of helps to think like, this is the thing you're going to get a lot of harvest from. You might get, hundreds of pounds of harvest from the single plant. So you want to support that plant as much as possible. So you're not so concerned that this tree is providing other permaculture functions. Its main function is that it's providing you a lot of harvest, a lot of edible food. So in this first step, and what right now we have this as a separate tool, but we're going to integrate this in that workflow that we're talking about, so that when you add your areas, you'll go straight from adding and marking your areas on a 2D map to figuring out whether they're permaculture or annual beds. And then you'll be able to kind of initially populate those areas with the results of the wizards from either the Build a Guild for perennials or the crop planner for the annuals. So initially, you can we have a search here in step one where you can figure out what zone you're in. I could for Andrea, I could start off with. So are you zone 9 or zone 8? And these are USDA zones, so they're the Department of Agriculture. They're essentially based off maximum and minimum temperatures. I can put 9 for
Zone
now.
9. Zone 9 for Houston. 9.
So this is a list of plots in the database that are their main guild function is that they're a star player. So this list will increase. Right now it's about 17 or 18 different things for your zone, and you can see the zones here. But we plan on eventually having support across all the different climates. So Houston is kind of a subtropical climate. The way to think about sometimes it's easier to search for things by zone, even though it's just a temperature demarcation. But the way to kind of think about these things logically is that it's temperate climate has seasons. So it has a cold season and it has a hot season. A subtropical, it's on the verge of having hot temperatures all year round, but there is a period during the winter that's quite a bit cooler than the summer. And then tropical is it's pretty much the same temperature year round. It's hot. And then cold desert and hot desert, that's a little more finicky, but the difference is that you in a cool desert, it can get quite cold, but it's still very arid, so you don't get a lot of rain. And then the hot desert, the temperatures are it's still very dry, but you also don't get a lot of precipitation. And we'll probably replace some of these other things like cool temperate. That's more like a lot of these things I was pulling from the Köppen climate classification, but there's I think we'll probably put Mediterranean, because if you look at the climate like California, it's dry, but it's still, you get quite a lot more precipitation than Arizona, and but it tends to be a little cooler. So while Nikki was talking, I quickly added Asian persimmon. Unfortunately, I think the icon is when we get to the part where we're drawing our guild, I think I wasn't able to quite load that. So this is kind of a kludge, but I'm just gonna pick parrots just so I can show you what the icon looks like when we get to that stage, the step 5, which is draw your guild. So you choose the pair and then you go to the next step. So you've got your star player selected. So now you're thinking about your functions, and we'll probably eventually have a few more functions here just so that you can think about all the different support elements that your plants can have in your garden. But for now, there's 5 different possibilities. So again, you can add these one by one here. And you could do it by layer. So this search allows you to kind of filter out what you're looking for specifically. So you could do it by function. So maybe we could add some ground covers. And we also want that zone. So, for example, we could do yarrow or white clover. So I'll just add these for now. And then we could have a pollinator. So you could have passion fruit. And then you could do an insectary. So you could have like a blanket flower as a possible one. And then you could have a dynamic accumulator. So you could have a feverfew because the northern pecan is quite a big one. So this is thinking mostly from the of your plants from the perspective of what function they're performing in your. So we could add licorice is one that we can add. So now we've got a few different functions. I'm not sure if I added a ground cover, but
That was
I mean,
clover.
clover. I don't know why that's not showing up. It might not be the primary thing. I think we'll see it when we get to the next steps, but yeah, there we go.
Oh.
Now you're kind of looking at it from a different view. So you've added your plants by their function. Now you're kind of looking at it like you want to also make sure that they're not all at the root level, they're not all in the vining level. So what you're looking for here is, it doesn't have to be perfect and you don't have to fill all of these layers, but it's probably good if you could fill 3 or 4 layers in a single guild. So an example would be you have a this might be a unrealistic example because it takes a while to establish this guild, but you could have a nut tree, which is very large and typically a canopy tree. And then a lot of your common fruit trees are understory trees. So even though it sounds like understory means that they're shady, but they tend to be, they can be anywhere from about 10 feet to about 30 or 40 feet. So most of your well-known fruit like persimmon or pear, plum, apple, peach, they're all understory trees. Then shrub bush. So this is very small trees as well as like very small dwarfing trees like a serviceberry, but also your blueberry bushes, your feijoas, your kind of large, like a hazelnut is a kind of at that layer. Herbaceous just means you kind of like large annual vegetables. So your tomatoes, your pumpkins, your sunflowers, these are all herbaceous. Ground cover, you're looking for elements that can prevent erosion on the soil and kind of give, they'll creep along the soil, kind of covering it. Root crop, that's pretty self-explanatory, and vining can cross over some of these other layers. So, you know, it'll climb up the herbaceous, the shrubs, and the understory. And it's good at finding its own light. So you're thinking about things vertically because then you can maximize your space. Whoops. And then Nikki, you talked about diversity. And here you can see I have to fix this. One of my sons put this as a legume, which is the same as Fabaceae, so they're the same family. But this is already a pretty good, if you just look at the diversity of families, you have 4 different plant families. So Aster is the daisy family, then Passiflora is, it's like its own little thing, and
3 different families.
sorry, 3 different families. So you might want to consider maybe like replacing one of the Asteraceae or Fabaceae with something else in your guild design. But what you do generally, the only thing that you're trying to avoid is if you had all of your plants in the same plant family, then it's kind of you're either going to do really well or your entire guild is going to fail, depending on whether it works in your climate or not and what kind of pest pressure that you have. So it's good to increase your plant families, and this gives you a check to kind of figure that out. And then finally, just to get a kind of a rough idea of what your guild would look like from an overhead view, I have this little mini designer thing. So it listed the plants that we picked for our guild on the right side, and then you would just drag the icons in to design how you want your plants to look in your guild. So our star player is so ignore that this would be a persimmon. So ignore that it says pear right now. And then, you might want a lot of clover underneath there. And you might want like one passion fruit that's climbing up. And then you could have a couple flowers as pollinators. So there's a limit to my artistic skills two-dimensionally, but you do want to give some consideration for what these things look like aesthetically. And eventually we're going to have something like this that works in 3D. But for now, at least this gives you kind of like a very, very rough idea of some of the foliage of these plants. And it's kind of a challenge to find good icons for every one of these things. But let's say you're pretty happy with what this looks like. Also, if you can drag these things around, if you don't like one of them, you would just click on the delete button. You would select and then delete the item. And if you want more than one, like if I wanted more than one passion fruit, then you can drag that on there. And then when you're finally pretty happy with what this looks like, we don't have this part implemented quite yet, but this would be in one of your areas. So now once you finalize that, then you can look at that information for those plants, the number of plants that you're planting, when you're planting them, what kind of harvest you got from them, from the plants for you. But for now, what we've just added so that you can get this information out of here, you can save the guild. And then this gives you kind of a table that you can print. And we'll add kind of a PDF output of the table with all the information, as well as the little map to give you a visual indication of it.
Dave, do you mind printing your screen, the whole screen with the table for your so I can have a copy of it, either PDF or image?
So I still have to, for now, the print's not going to look great, but do you still want it like this, or?
Maybe just a PDF or something. I don't know. That'd be great. Thank you. Great. Thank you, Dave. So what do you all think? Do you think that was helpful, or does anybody have any questions? And feel free to yeah, at the end of it, or unmute, or no questions. What was your yeah, any questions? I'll leave some room for you guys to reply about guilds, or how you would apply this to this coming year. I just need time to get on Sage. Well, why don't we have a workshop where it's just let's get on Sage together and do it, right? And plant it, and no agenda or no, I'm not teaching anything. It's just to have anybody who needs get stuck in the password or something of that sort to come on and do it. Yeah. Um, and then what is your do you guys have any takeaways from here that you've learned or any resolutions?
I like the whole idea of it. I think that it looks really helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, how about you, Jeremy? Is there anything that you think can be improved or and feel free to keep your camera on because I'd like to take a group photo, even if it's just four of us. I'm gonna take more of those this year. Yeah. All right.
I like it as well. I think it's helpful to see. I mean, the visual part is good, but I think it's going to be dramatically different for each person that's doing it. But knowing the plants and understanding that, especially for me, I'm not really my permaculture background. I know all about it, but we don't. I wasn't raised practicing permaculture. We My mother taught me basically the victory garden,
Yeah.
you know, and she still does it. And I've tried to get her to change, but I've tried some things and with limited success in that area. But anyways, just seeing the plants and as you're clicking through it, you're seeing it helps reinforce the concepts. And I think to me that's really important because once I know what I want for a star player, and once I have an idea of that, then I have to go outside and kind of look at the area where I want to put this guild, I guess. It's going to take a little practice, but I think it's a um, really helpful tool.
Great. Well, I'm glad. And if there's anything else, I mean, as you will use it, you'll find some bugs. And I'm gonna take a quick photo now. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay. You'll find some bugs. There is a place to submit your bugs here on this permaculturegardens.org Sage Beta Test Central. There's a bug form. So I'm gonna drop that in the chat for you all, but I'll put it in the bottom of emails as well, so you guys can give us your feedback. And if you want a specific plant and you're going around Sage and you're like, I really want this plant, it's not in Sage, you can submit it as well in that forum. So and on that page to us, and then we'll get it and we'll put it in. So we can't ask, unfortunately, I want this, I want you guys to be able to add it or yourself, but Dave says that's not how it works. So
I think the problem though, is not so much the information, and I think eventually we'll have kind of like what do they call it, citizen science,
yes,
where everybody contributes to get a comprehensive set of information for all the perennial plants and the annual plants. But right now the difficult part is getting the little icons
mm,
and sizing them correctly and then uploading them and making sure that they're compatible. I don't have a great validation for that right now. So like my kids have uploaded pictures of their sister. as the icon for a plant. So I think what we'll do is for now, we're adding about 10 plants a day. And I think over the next month, that will get much better coverage. And then at that point, I think once we have a little larger base of information, that's when we'll kind of open it up to everybody to kind of add more information.
thank you. Thanks, Dave. And then finally, consider becoming a Sage VIP. So a Sage VIP is if you reserve Sage for $1, when we open up Sage to purchase in March, during our Kickstarter, you will get 50% off. You'll get the lowest Sage at the lowest price we ever offer it. If you're a Sage VIP, all Sage VIPs have access to these workshops plus a few more freebies. So it's our consider becoming a Sage VIP to help support our Kickstarter. And that's at permaculturegardens.org/sage on our website. Thank you so much for everything here. Any last words, Dave, that you want to share?
Yeah, so I think that the thing with Sage, it's going to be evolving over time. The Kickstarter is there's a kind of minimum set of functionality that we want to iron out and make sure that it's useful for everybody in terms of planning their garden and being able to record their observations. And then our hope is that it'll kind of evolve. That the Kickstarter is kind of just to get things the ball rolling, and then as people start using it, we really want to also it to be kind of like a gateway to permaculture. So it's not permaculture isn't this arcane thing that people in the woods practice around a cauldron or something.
Yeah, to
But
be
they're-
easier.
yeah, that it's accessible, and anything that we can do to kind of help that and promote the idea that it's not too difficult to be able to get a lot of amazing abundant harvest from your garden, both medicinally and edibly and in other respects as well. Then we're really kind of hoping that moves things a little bit for the people who use the tool.
Well, thank you very much, you all. I will see you hopefully again on one of our next workshops. We'll keep offering these, but more.
Hopefully be warmer next time.
Yeah, I hope it's warmer and yeah, you'll hear more from us soon. So thank you for joining.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank y'all.